Very hard for me to start after that. I said yesterday after Bill Breimer did his confession and absolution that was my one cry for the year. But they got a few more out of me this morning. I'm sitting in the back with Del Campbell, my new friend Del Campbell's voice in my ears, and as we say the Lord's Prayer, I hear a chorus of children reciting it from memory. And if I could see you from the back. I really feel oftentimes at this conference, it's so amazing. I'm not going to do a short history of it, but I was originally one of the people that said, let's not do a conference. Yeah, I know, wrong decision. And now I stand here and I feel like William Wallace as he says, and I see before me a whole army of my countrymen in defiance of tyranny. You have come to fight as free men, and free men you are. I was a little worried about going first or first-ish right after, and then Dan last night killed it, so I said, I'll get a new vest. For those of you that are counting, this is indeed a new vest. I said, but this actually gives me the opportunity to beat Dave Zoll to the punch of showing a video. So I'm going to show a video and steal a little bit of Dave's thunder, and also gives me the opportunity to beat Steve Paulson to a full absolution. So I'm going to go for that too. We've heard it a few times, but since the entire conference is centered around the fact that we need the creed more in our life, I thought that since I'm doing the first article, I'd go over the first article one more time for you. First article of the creed. I believe in God the Father Almighty, maker of heaven and earth. And Luther asks, what is this? Says Luther, I believe that God has made me and all creatures, that he has given me my body and soul, my eyes and ears, and all my limbs, my reason and all of my senses, and that he still preserves them. In addition thereto, clothing and shoes, meat and drink, house and home, wife and children, fields and cattle, and all my goods. That he provides me richly and daily with all that I need to support this body and life. He protects me from all danger and guards and preserves me from all evil. And all of this out of pure fatherly divine goodness and mercy, without any merit or worthiness within me, for all which I owe it to him to thank, praise, serve, and obey him. This is most certainly true. All right. Jokes out of the way. I'm no comedian like Dan Price. You'll find that out. Jim Nestigan brought up in our podcast yesterday something which he told me a long time ago that I've spent a lot of time thinking about, and perhaps is one of the reasons why I wrote Being Dad. That Luther said that this first article is the most difficult article for us to believe. There are many reasons for that, possibly. Some of them, I think, are obvious. We are sinners at constant rebellion against God. But it occurs to me that there are possibly two less obvious things that can lead us to an utter distrust in the first article of the Creed. The first is one that if you've heard me talk before, my son will make fun of me for doing the same thing over and over again in this talk, is the ever-present pictures of absent, presently absent, and just plain bad fathers here in the world. The second is our sin, but our sin of a particular nature. That is, our desire to be world makers, to be creators of our own heaven and our own earth. So going in order, let's look at this first problem. Absent, presently absent, or just plain old bad fathers in our lives and in the world. I was thinking about how to present this in a way that I haven't done a million times before, and it occurred to me that one of the greatest shows that ever has been aired on television, The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, has a particularly appropriate clip. Let me introduce, if you're not familiar with the show, let me introduce you to it just a little bit. It's about a teenager named Will, played by, appropriately enough, Will Smith, who was born and raised in South Philadelphia, spent most of his days on the playground, pretty much just chilling out, relaxing, calling it cool. Sometimes he'd shoot some b-ball outside of the school. Eventually, a couple of guys that were up to no good, they started making some trouble in his neighborhood. He got in one little fight, and his mom got scared, and she sent him to live with his auntie and uncle in Bel Air. Now, the backstory is that Will is fatherless. He's one of many fatherless children growing up in his neighborhood and more in the world in general. He has a deep hole in his life, a hole that I'm somewhat familiar with. He's often trying to fill this hole by getting into trouble. And when he goes out to live in Bel Air, he comes under the fatherhood of his uncle. And the scene that we're going to show here is set up when Will's actual father, after 15 years of not being around, comes back into the picture. He takes Will out for a night. He shows him a good time. He offers to take Will on a trip with him. He's a truck driver, a long-haul trip for the rest of the summer. And because this has been such a deep hole in Will's life, and even though everything in his experience tells him he should distrust his father, he's so excited that he agrees to go. He gets in a fight with the man who has raised him, Uncle Phil, about whether or not this is a good idea, at which point his surrogate father, Uncle Phil, relents and says, go ahead and go on the trip. Where we start the scene tonight is Will as he's expecting his father to show up to take him on this trip. So, as they say, roll tape.
You a better man than me. You happy? Now, you gonna tell Will or not?
I'm not gonna do your dirty work for you.
Fine. I'll call him from the road.
Yeah, then why don't you do that?
Yeah, I'll do that. Daddy-o! What's up? Will, man, I'm glad you're here. Some business came up I gotta handle. So we're gonna have to put our trip on hold. You understand?
Yeah, that's cool. That's cool.
Just for a couple of weeks.
I understand.
Yeah, maybe a little longer.
Yeah, whatever.
Look, I'll call you next week and we'll iron out the details, okay?
Yeah.
It was great seeing you, son.
You too, Lou.
Yeah,
I'm sorry, Will.
You know what? Actually, this works out better for me. You know, the slimmies of summer come to class wearing next to nothing. You know what I'm saying?
Will, it's all right to be angry.
Hey, why should I be mad? I'm saying, at least he said goodbye this time. I just wish I hadn't wasted my money buying this stupid present.
I'm sorry. If there was something that I
Hey,
could
you know what? You ain't got to do nothing, Uncle Phil. Hey, ain't like I'm still 5 years old, you know? Ain't like I'm gonna be sitting up every night asking my mom, when's Daddy coming home, you know? Who needs him? Hey, he wasn't there to teach me how to shoot my first basket, but I learned, didn't I? Hey, I got pretty damn good at it too, didn't I, Uncle Phil?
You did.
Got through my first date without him, right? I learned how to drive, I learned how to shave, I learned how to fight without him. I had 14 great birthdays without him. He never even sent me a damn card. To hell with him! I ain't need him then and I don't need him now.
Will.
Nah, you know what, Uncle Phil? I'm gonna get through college without him. I'm gonna get a great job without him. I'm gonna marry me a beautiful honey, and I'm gonna have me a whole bunch of kids. I'm gonna be a better father than he ever was. And I sure as hell don't need him for that, because ain't a damn thing he could ever teach me about how to love my kids. How come he don't want me, man?
Just a second. I think I've seen that clip 100 times. Our reality is that just in America alone, over 40% of all children in America grow up in a home where they have no father. There are 2.9 million cases of child abuse that are reported and acted on every year, from parents, fathers, to children. There are countless dads, and I've heard the stories in my travels over the last 4 years as I lecture on being dad. Countless stories of fathers who were present, but certainly presently absent. Even more stories of fathers who are just plain jerks to their kids. And then every Sunday, those of us who feel it's important bring our children to church. And if you're in a church like mine, every Sunday you confess one of the creeds, oftentimes the Apostles' Creed, as they confess that they believe in God the Father Almighty. And yet, do we ever ask, how do we expect our children to believe in a God who is called Father, as confessed in the first article, who we say loves us, provides for us, and saves us through the work of another man, his Son, if they've never seen a father or a man who is good or described as such? Excuse me, that clip caught me. Hold on a second. I teach a class at the university when it's offered called Creeds and Confessions in the master's program. That class kind of is ordered as you might expect. It starts out with covering the 3 ecumenical creeds. One of the first times I taught that class in person was over a summer intensive, and we had just gone over the creeds, and I remember going to lunch at the cafeteria and having one of the students from this class come and sit down with me. I did not know her. This isn't like an undergrad program where you'll see these people for 4 years and you get to know them. I likely will only see the people in this class for that class. And this was the first day of class. And she sat down with me and she said, I'm a Christian now, and I want to go into the ministry. But getting to the point where I am a Christian and where I can confess the creed was very difficult for me, because I grew up in a house where my father sexually abused me my entire life. So now I come to this class, and it never really occurred to me that part of what my teaching would include would be maybe teaching people the creed. She said, oftentimes I don't even know how I believe in God the Father Almighty, maker of heaven and earth. I certainly don't know how I'm going to teach it to others. When I talk about this, I usually bring in the importance of the idea of analogies. That one of the things that makes this a less difficult article to grab hold of is when we have good pictures in our lives of things that look somewhat like what we're talking about in the creed. Some creator of our heaven and our earth, who provides for us, who cares for us, who gives us good things, who loves us and forgives us. And when that's absent, this becomes difficult. Lack of good fathers, lack of good mentors is a plague on the church. It's a plague that has led to generations of people walking away from the faith. This is why after years of years after writing Being Dad and years of lecturing on it, I continue to go out and encourage men and fathers to be shadowy figures and pictures of God's grace. Yet the problem remains. And there is still a second problem, probably a worse problem. The fact of world making. You see, our sin, our deep, deep sin, is the sin of world making. It's the sin of attempting to be God. It's the sin of attempting to be the ultimate influencer. We are so turned in on ourselves, as the Reformers would say, that all of the gifts from God that we read in Luther's explanation to the first article of the Creed, we tend to take credit for supplying all that is needed to support this body and life, for house and home, wife and children. Probably not so much fields and cattle anymore, but you get the idea. We desire many things for ourselves, but paramount among them is we desire for our reason to be the ultimate. We desire for our own will to be done. And we desire our own glory to be virtually unbounding. I think we, especially we Americans, desire to make our own way in this world. And then we think we do. When we're successful, we take all the credit. We construct the idea that we have provided for everything. Our ultimate desire is for self-reliance, and especially in our day and age, for self-promotion. And at the end of the day, we not only want to take credit for providing for ourselves, we want to do the ultimate sin and attempt to justify ourselves before a holy God. What is the answer to our conundrums? It's difficult to take the creed, I think, in a standalone fashion. Because what's difficult for us to believe in one article is provided in other articles. When we cannot confess the creed, Christ confesses the creed on our behalf. Christ provides the pictures. Christ provides the picture of what our world is really like. He even gives us that analogy of being in the picture of a good father as it's explained in the prodigal son. Now, I'm not going to do the whole thing, although I have a slide somewhere. But this is what I spent years teaching. The idea that in the story of the prodigal son, we get a picture of what it means to be a good father. Can we get the picture up, possibly? There we go. This is a painting by a Lutheran artist named Ed Riojas. Ed attends a church in Grand Rapids, I think. I went to go see that church. It's amazing. Before I go forward, I'd like to say I showed two paintings by Ed today with his permission. If you want to check out more of what he does, I think it's edriojasart.com or something like that. But just Google it, you'll find it. The picture that we get here in the prodigal son is an amazing one, and it's a telling one. It shows us that the ideas we have about what it means to be a good father are probably not correct. And this is exactly what Christ presents to us in Luke chapter 15, 11 through 32. A father who has two sons that we'd recognize, right? A good one and a bad one. The bad one early on shows himself to be very, very bad and takes half of what never belongs to him, half of the family's wealth, goes off to a far-off land and squanders it, we find out, on sex, drugs, and rock and roll. Comes to The very, very bottom takes a big fall, loses all of his money, loses all of his influence, loses all of his world-making ability, comes to find himself eating what pigs eat, and begins to concoct a plan for his own redemption. A plan where he will go back to his father and make a deal. But the bigger picture here, as Ed shows, is this idea that who the Father is. The Father is not the guy that comes in with the bigger law and the bigger booming voice. The Father is the guy that does the unexpected. The Father is the guy that provides all that we need to support this body and life when we don't deserve it and when we can't confess it. The Father is the one who loves, whose love is unbounding. He loves to the sake of losing everything that he has, everything that's important to him, if it would become necessary. And you see this in this picture. The son is distraught, and the father is acting like not even a man in his culture. He's running. His robe will be pulled up. He's being looked down upon by his neighbors. His house is far away. And if you know the story, the next thing that he does is he begins to give back to this son everything that the son has already stolen from him. He gives him wealth. He makes him a member of the family. He gives him the ability to make financial decisions. He covers him in his own robe of righteousness. He kills and eats with neighbors that hate him the most valuable possession that they have left, the fattened calf. He kills to Christ for him. He gathers around him a group of people that disdain him, that look down their noses at him when he runs to embrace his son, and he feeds them with that fattened calf. And when his good son comes out and chastises him for his grace and for his mercy, he entreats that son to come in and join the party, to come be with redeemed sinners, so that he can once more confess that he too has all that he needs to support this body and life. Son, you have always been with me. And if you know the next line, say it. And all that I have is yours. It is good that we should celebrate. We must celebrate. For the son, brother of yours was lost and is found, was dead and alive. Sons of absent, bad, and presently absent, and even jerk fathers are in this parable given the gift of the picture of the ultimate gracious Father that they maybe never had, never will have, or will ever know, except in the story that Christ tells here and the confession that they confess on Sunday morning with the whole Christian church on earth. He also breaks down our sense of being world makers. Christ does this by calling us exactly what we are in another parable, the parable of the treasure hidden in the field. If we can bring that one up. Also by Ed Riojas. I think it's probably the shortest parable. There's a man who found a treasure hidden in a field, and when he found it, he buried again, and then he went off and in his joy went and sold all that he had and bought the field. He breaks down our sense of being world makers by calling us exactly what we are: dead treasures. We are the dead treasures. We are buried in the field that is our graveyard. He buys that graveyard, and he promises to come back and pull us out of that grave one day to bring us to the Father. The same Father that we confess in this first article of the Creed. Furthermore, we are told time and time again that this is not just something he did out of obligation. This is not just something that he did because he had to, but as it says in the explanation, out of fatherly divine goodness and mercy, without any merit or worthiness within me. And as the parable tells us here in Matthew chapter 13, that when he does it, not out of obligation. He does it because of his joy. It's because that we're in our sin. It's because of our sinful experiences. It's because of the sin of this world that has produced for us bad fathers and absent fathers. It's because of our own sin, our being turned in on ourselves, our desire to be God the Father and to make our own world and to take credit for all that we need to support this body of life. It's because of that sin that we have a difficult time confessing the first article of the Creed, that we believe in God the Father Almighty, maker of heaven and earth, because we want to be that. And because we have such a difficult time confessing this first article, Christ confesses it for us. And because Christ has confessed it on your behalf, you are able to hear and acknowledge and even now confess. You are now free to confess your attempts to create God in your own image. You are now free to confess your need for a picture and analogy when God is offering you Christ right here, right now, in the gifts of his word proclaimed from this sinner's lips to your sinner's ears. You are free to confess your desire to make a world wherein you decide who you are and what you deserve. You are free to confess your refusal to ask God to get mixed up in your day-to-day life in this world. And you're finally free to confess your ultimate sin, that is, your attempt to be God. But there is good news here too. And that's the news that I am free and I am called to absolve you. Because as Jim told us yesterday, God will not allow your sin to have the last word. So in the name of the risen Son, with the power of the Holy Spirit riding on my sinful lips, and as the Father from heaven looks upon you with his favor, you are forgiven of all your sin against the first article. And indeed, you are forgiven of all your sin. In the name of Christ Jesus. Amen.